This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
And thank you for the opportunity to appear today. The Union of National Defence Employees of the Public Service Alliance of Canada represents 20,000 civilian defence workers. Our members ensure the military operations are mission ready at all time, and that military members have safe and secure places to live and work. Our members are experts who work on bases, in offices, warehouses, airports, labs, and garages. They provide consistent and knowledgeable services so that the military can be agile and combat ready. Privatization, contracting out, sexual misconduct, harassment, and discrimination undermine our members' work and occupational satisfaction. Aside from what we've learned listening to this committee and to the news, we have little experience with McKinsey. But the problems with McKinsey are the greater problems with contracting out of what should be public service work. Our 2020 report highlighted the dangers of contracting out cleaning services. It showed that budget allocation restraints force base commanders to regularly contract out essential work, costing more and providing poorer service. For example, this is a quote from a D&D briefing note from Kingston. It was observed that in an effort to increase the profit margin, the contract cleaners were using inferior and improper cleaning products, which resulted in additional maintenance, environmental problems, and health and safety issues, resulting in unfit living conditions. Our report also detailed the situation of a contracted minimum wage worker who cleaned the D&D Medical Centre. During most of her employment, she didn't have the necessary WMIS training and didn't understand how the chemicals she used could hurt herself or others. She was instructed to water down cleaning solutions and forced to clean secure areas without proper security clearances. It wasn't her fault, but her work was compromised the patients and other workers. She eventually quit for better work at a fast food outlet. Harassment within D&D is systemic and entrenched, but it's not just limited to members of the military. Firefighters at CFB Suffield have accused a deputy fire chief of violent behavior while the fire chief stood idly by. Complaints dating back to 2019 have yet to be resolved. Leadership ignored legislation and needlessly delayed the investigation for more than 20 months. Ultimately, the complaints were investigated, and in November 2021, all allegations of physical attacks, verbal abuse, and threatening behaviors were founded. D&D leadership responded to this by inviting the assailant back into the workplace and offering him the freedom to determine who he would work with and when. D&D leadership has ignored my continued pleas to provide a safe environment for these firefighters. It's been 40 months since the complaints were filed, and the CFB Suffield leadership have advised me that they have not received direction from their chain of command, that their actions are not appropriate nor in need of correction. D&D needs to follow the legislation outlined in Part 2 of the Canada Labour Code, something that the CFB Suffield leadership has resisted doing. These firefighters continue to live in a toxic, poisoned work environment. National Defence needs to enforce harassment policies and ensure that those committing abuses face consequences, and civilian workers must be included in all aspects of any review of the current systems. When it comes to occupational satisfaction, wage gaps are a major issue. D&D's operational workers are paid less than their equivalent trades in the private sector, and this is causing recruitment and retention issues, not to mention the impacts to the defence team members' morale. For instance, Canadian Forces Health Services employs dental hygienists to ensure military members' oral care is well maintained. The massive layoffs stemming from the government's 2012 federal budget caused the department to contract out hygienists' work. Since 2016, CFHS has attempted to bring the work back into the public service, but have failed because the public service pay is so much lower in comparison with the private sector. So instead, National Defence continues to pay contractors to come in, working side by side with the public servants doing exactly the same work. The only difference is that the contract hygienist is making $6 an hour more than the public servant. For some reason, National Defense seems to think that paying their contractors from a different budget line than the line for their public servants is saving money. They've forgotten that there's only one taxpayer. I thank you, and I look forward to any questions.
Wow, thank you. Exactly 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Hickner. We're going to start with the first 6 minutes rounds. And Madam Kuzi, you're up first for 6 minutes.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for being here today, Ms. Winger. It's very much appreciated. I wanted to start off my comments regarding your story about the firefighters. This is certainly something that we on this side of the House have a lot of respect for, and we noticed a discrepancy that existed actually with those firefighters across the country and those who in national defense were only eligible for their pension after 30 years of service or at age 65. When really they serve beside those who are eligible for retirement after 20 years of service. So I want you to know that myself, as Shadow Minister for the Treasury Board, along with my colleague, Member of Parliament Damien Kirk, Member of Parliament for Battle River Crowfoot, have actually sent a letter to Minister Fortier today asking her to remedy this situation, to put the retirement, the pension of firefighters at National Defense on par with those firefighters across the nation, because certainly they deserve the same rights, they deserve the same benefits that their brothers and sisters are receiving across the country. So I'm very excited to sort of announce this here today in coordination with what you're saying. So thank you very much for the opportunity for me to share this good news, and I do really hope that the Minister will respond which is only the correct response, that their work should be seen and valued the same as firefighters in other areas all across the country. So thank you very much for the opportunity for me to share that with Canada here today. So I recognize that you have not done very much work, with consulting firms or McKinsey, you mentioned in particular, and you mentioned a lot of situations where there is great disparity between private sector and public sector. And, this is something I think that the government needs to look even further at. And in addition to delivering services for Canadians, I do believe that the government has to take responsibility to have competitive wages for its public servants, so that we can attract the best talent, in addition to providing the services that both people in uniform as well as Canadians deserve. But do you think that the outsourcing of work to private consultants have had any impact on your colleagues at National Defense? Could you provide any commentary on that? It doesn't have to be in response to McKinsey specifically, but in response to the outside work of consultants at the Department of National Defense. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for the letter regarding the firefighters' pension. That is that's been a challenge that we've been trying to address, 20 years easily. And when we talk about the disparity between the firefighters, federal and elsewhere, it's even greater than what you've described, in that firefighters work a 44-hour work week versus 37 and a half that most of the other public servants work. They end up working nearly 6 years longer for the same pension, and yet they contribute. So I very much appreciate the letter that you're sending, and we're cautiously optimistic. Certainly there is a disparity between the private sector and the public service, and definitely that is blindingly obvious with the competitive wages. And I'm sure you are well aware that if that doesn't get addressed shortly, Canada's likely going to see the largest strike that they've ever seen in Canadian history. As far as the outsourcing, it's really a very difficult, touchy subject for my membership, in that they see the work that they could do, the work that they used to do to support the military members, and instead they see that work get contracted out time and time again. And there's two different ideologies when it comes to the contracting. The contractors are there. They may support the military, but they're there to make a dollar. In the end, that's what their goal is. Whereas with the public servants, their goal is to make sure that that mission is run as successfully and to the best of their abilities. And so they conflict from time to time. And we see it time and time again. I know in my own office in the Counterterrorism Centre back in Suffield, Alberta, we had a building built, and when I was sitting in my office, it was very obvious that the heater and the air conditioner were not coming through into my office. And so I contacted DCC, who was overseeing the remodelizing, and they came back and said, no, we've checked our records, everything's balanced. So I went over to National Defense and asked a few of my friends that work in the trades and asked them to come take a look at the building.
If you could wrap up, please. Thank you.
Okay. Turns out the building wasn't balanced. It was impossible that it ever could have been balanced. Both the contractor and the subcontractor signed off that it was balanced, but there was literally metal in the air handling units that would have prevented it from ever balancing. So, this is just a very common example to things that we've seen. I could sit all night telling you about it.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. Merci, Monsieur le Président.